Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a conflict that literally broke and reshaped the modern world, World War I. We're going to take a structured deep dive into the incredibly dense geopolitical web that triggered the whole shebang.
But, before we look at the how and the why, we really need to pause on this number. 15 to 22 million. That's the estimated number of military and civilian deaths caused by this conflict. It's an absolutely staggering human cost, and it instantly establishes the sheer, unprecedented gravity of the war. Understanding how humanity stumbled into this catastrophe, well, it isn't just history. It's a crucial lesson in how fragile global stability can actually be.
The crazy thing is, the people living through it knew right away that the world was changing forever. Back in August 1914, a publication called The Independent wrote, "This is the Great War. It names itself." The shock of the contemporary reaction was just profound. In fact, by September of that exact same year, as the absolute devastation became clear, German biologist Ernst Haeckel wrote that this would become the First World War in the full sense of the word. Okay, let's dive right into this and lay out our roadmap. Here is how we're going to untangle this step by step. First, an overview of the global catastrophe. Second, the web of alliances. Third, the great arms race. And finally, number 4, the Balkan powder keg. All right, section 1, overview a global catastrophe. Let's quickly break down just how fast the world descended into a totally new kind of industrialized warfare. The dominoes fell with terrifying speed. Just think about the timeline. On June 28, 1914, Austro-Hungarian heir Franz Ferdinand is assassinated. Just 1 month later, war is declared on Serbia. By early August, Europe's massive superpowers, we're talking Russia, Germany, France, and the UK, are all completely dragged into the fray. What started as a localized assassination absolutely exploded into a global trench war. And this conflict unleashed terrifying new technologies that the world had literally never seen on this scale. Things like tanks, machine guns, heavy artillery, and chemical weapons. The Western Front basically solidified into a near-continuous line of fortified trenches stretching all the way from the English Channel to Switzerland, while the Eastern Front became this dynamic but equally bloody meat grinder. So you really have to ask yourself, how exactly did a fragile peace collapse into a world war so fast? Well, to understand this explosion, we actually have to flash back to the 19th century. We need to uncover the hidden ingredients of the powder keg that had been quietly filling up for decades. That brings us to section 2, the web of alliances, a divided Europe. This was essentially the geopolitical chess match of the late 19th century, where paranoid empires started choosing sides. For a good chunk of the 19th century, peace was kept by what was called the Concert of Europe. Think of it as a tenuous balance of power maintained by major European nations, designed specifically to prevent large-scale conflicts. But over time, this delicate balance was slowly eroded. You had the rise of new imperialism, the decline of the Ottoman Empire, and crucially, the unification of the German Empire under Otto von Bismarck back in 1871. That unification changed everything. Bismarck actually set up these incredibly intricate treaties, like the reinsurance treaty with Russia, specifically to keep France isolated and just maintain that fragile peace. But then came a catastrophic strategic blunder. In 1890, the ambitious new Kaiser, Wilhelm II, dismisses Bismarck. Wilhelm and his new chancellor decide, hey, we're not going to renew that secret reinsurance treaty with Russia. Huge mistake. It immediately gave France an opening, pushing a suddenly isolated Russia to ally with the French in 1894. And this brilliantly illustrates the direct result of that blunder. Europe fractured into 2 massive, totally deadlocked coalitions. On one side, you've got the Triple Entente, formed by France, the United Kingdom, and Russia. On the flip side, the Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. These agreements basically guaranteed that if any small conflict broke out involving just one nation, the rest would be contractually dragged right in. The trap was completely set. Moving on to section 3, the great arms race, steel and sea. Now that these locked alliances were formed, they began arming themselves to the teeth in a climate of absolute paranoia. So this arms race actually started at sea. The German Empire wanted a blue water navy to project global power, directly challenging the British Royal Navy. The British, however, completely outmaneuvered them. In 1906, they launched the HMS Dreadnought. This ship was so advanced, it literally rendered every other existing battleship on Earth completely obsolete overnight.
Despite German Admiral Tirpitz pouring vast sums of money into the Imperial German Navy, they just couldn't catch up to Britain's technological advantage. Finally, acknowledging this defeat, Germany made a major pivot in 1911, taking their resources and doubling down on their land army instead. Now, what's really interesting about this is the sheer, terrifying velocity of the militarization that followed. Between 1908 and 1913, military spending across the 6 major European powers spiked by a massive 50%. You might be wondering why the sudden panic on land? Well, Germany and Austria-Hungary were absolutely terrified of Russia. Following a revolution in 1905, Russia began massively expanding its railways and transportation infrastructure. For Germany, whose entire war strategy relied on mobilizing faster than the massive Russian army, this closing gap was viewed as an existential threat. So everyone just started expanding their standing armies, extending mandatory military service, and hoarding weapons like crazy.
And that leads us to Section 4, the Balkan powder keg, the spark. We have the alliances, we have the weapons. Now for the final, most volatile ingredient, the shifting borders and intense nationalism in the Balkans. The Balkans at this time were incredibly unstable. Primarily, this was because the Ottoman Empire was in steep decline, creating a very dangerous power vacuum. And of course, the major powers were hungry to carve up these territories. You had Pan-Slavic Russia claiming to be the protector of Serbia and the Orthodox Slavs. On the flip side, you had Austria-Hungary, who viewed any Serbian expansion, or really any Slavic nationalism at all, as a direct, lethal threat to their own multi-ethnic empire. The geopolitical friction here was just immense. The real tipping point arrived with the 1908 Bosnian crisis. So the crucial point here is that Austria-Hungary brazenly and unilaterally annexed the former Ottoman territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina. This was an incredibly aggressive move that perfectly demonstrates how quickly regional disputes can shatter global stability. It permanently ruined any chance of Austrian-Russian diplomacy in the region, and it deeply, deeply angered Serbian nationalists who wanted that exact territory for a greater Slavic state. The anger was literally boiling over. So bringing this all together, decades of political missteps divide Europe into these rigid alliances, while paranoia drives a massive industrial arms race. Then, imperial tensions and regional nationalisms reach an absolute boiling point in the volatile Balkans. So when, on June 28, 1914, a Bosnian Serb named Gavrilo Princip fires the bullets that assassinate the Austro-Hungarian heir, the outcome is tragically inevitable. Because of those historical traps laid over decades, those bullets instantly ignite the entire world. As we wrap up our analysis today, I really want to leave you with this final thought. Millions of people hoped that the sheer horror of this conflict would make it the war to end all wars. But could a war born of such complex, unresolved imperial rivalries ever truly deliver lasting peace? Well, when the dust finally settled, the collapse of the Russian, German, Austro-Hungarian, and Ottoman empires created a chaotic map of new borders and very deep resentments, which, as we know, set the exact stage for an even more devastating conflict just 2 decades later. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning history.